So let's talk a little bit about what happens when you get to the end user and desktop migration phase. This is kind of a key component because this is when all this planning and all this budgeting is now going to the point of execution. So Andrew, you want to talk a little bit about that?
So from a budgeting perspective, once you have the desktop design done, you need to determine who is going to get a pilot of that desktop, and that's going to affect your cost. So is it 50 people in a headquartered office, or is it 5 people in 10 offices located globally? And so you just need to determine who those folks are and how they're going to get the desktop and what kind of support you're going to provide them. So chances are for a pilot, you're not going to fly a trainer to each one of those remote locations for support. So how is that going to be handled, and how are you going to make sure that those folks who are likely to encounter more problems than others are going to be supported? And then from a budgeting perspective, it's a matter of how many people, how many different locations, and then how long will they pilot for. We're a big proponent of doing a lot of upfront testing, then going with the stabilization phase where we pilot out, say, the IT department and a couple of project stakeholders. And we like to have it pretty much baked by the time we go to real full-blown pilot, so that we're not handing pilot users a mess that's breaking, but more of a validation that we didn't skip something. So that's the approach we like to take. But it depends on what your organization considers an acceptable user experience and how much of a runway you have prior to the pilot. As you're looking at budgeting, what's your status about availability? A lot of the work tends to get done in the evening. How much hardware will be replaced? And how do remote users typically receive new equipment? So do you need to have sales folks come in to bring in their laptops and get them swapped out? Will they be shipped out? And what's the approach that you take on that? As you're looking at costs, one of the things you need to know is, are you using a zero-touch or low-touch migration? Zero-touch migrations are excellent. It depends on the type of environment. If you have a user base that needs, that needs that personal experience, that you want to make sure everything's set up just right, then there's going to be a cost associated with that. What's the QA process going to be? You can invest in the QA process up front by scripting it and automating it, or you can print out a checklist that you have a human being check before they declare that desktop is okay. It kind of goes back to the zero-touch, low-touch migration. How are you going to staff your team? So you will need an architect-level person to do the desktop design, and more than likely you're going to need a solid troubleshooter throughout the process, just because things are going to come up. There are going to be application compatibility issues. There's going to be a macro that no one knew about. And you're going to need to have someone that has the cycles and the skill sets to troubleshoot those types of issues. How are you going to train your team? How are you going to train your help desk? What's the cost of that? How are you going to train your support folks? What's the cost of that? From a desktop deployment perspective, if you're going to be using desktop deployment teams, are you going to use one team and fly them to the different sites so that they bring the expertise with them? Or are you going to outsource and bring in a third party at each of the different locations and rely more on a tight process to make sure that they can do it? So all things that affect the strategy. A rollback strategy also, so where proponents, it depends on the customer, but for the most part, you want to make sure you have a copy of that desktop, unless you're in an environment that's completely locked down, there's nothing on the desktop that you need to worry about. But some organizations keep the hard drive for a while, some make an image of it and put it somewhere for a while. How will that be done? How will that be managed? And what's the cost implication of it? And then finally, just as you're planning it, the ultimate thing is how many users are you comfortable migrating in an evening? So technically, once you're done with the image and you've got the applications packaged, you can do 5,000 people in an evening. It's more of your organization's appetite for risk. If something goes wrong, we've just touched 5,000 machines. And it's also your ability to put people through training. Typically, the training becomes the limiter on how many folks can be migrated at a night.
Absolutely. So the whole migration process and understanding those decision points, you can see is a direct line back to what items you're putting in your budget. Because this is really, for users, the migration is really when the project affects them. It becomes real to them when they're in line for the migration.